Welcome to the Ascension Alchemists podcast. My name is Michael Abramson, and this is my solo episode where I'm so delighted to share a very important topic, a key that is essential to our life's purpose, and that really is the power of communication. And I feel in a man's journey, this is such a vital key, not only in our expression, but our connection to others, because it literally becomes one area that I feel personally has been a mastery of its own. Growing up, it's been really interesting to look at this art of communicating. Because as a man, and speaking to you all, have you ever been in a situation where you said the wrong thing at the very wrong moment, and it just created an incredible amount of issues and problems? And I feel when it comes to communication, it's so vital to understand how it's beyond just the expression, but also our ability to listen and what it is here for us to do, and our ultimate connection to ourselves and our connection to the divine. So welcome everyone. Please come on in and join with a nice cup of tea or coffee, because today is a very enlightening conversation, because I feel this is an area where many of us were really never taught how to communicate consciously. And in my journey as a conscious evolved man, in which this was one of my most favorite areas to teach in my 12-week series of delivering the keys to become a conscious man, I recognize how communication has been really suppressed within us men growing up. I remember growing up and it felt like there were all these conditions that we were taught where, man up, men don't cry. And it was rare because as a sensitive man, a lot of us didn't know what to do with our feelings. Actually, whoever taught us how to express our feelings and emotions. And that's an area where I feel I like to start out with, because one thing that I feel that's happening in today's world right now, especially in our ascension journey, is just the ability to communicate and articulate in our true accountability and authenticity. Many years ago, we would not be having this conversation about how true and authentic we can be. But I feel in this day and age, we're really drawing the true essence of who we are and how we want to really show up in our most fullest expression. And that is why I find communication is such an important key to master, because when you look at it, some of the most successful people in this world are great communicators. And even when we look at our relationship, how vital is it to learn and to express our communication to our greatest efficiency? Because whether it's our wives or husbands, whether it's our bosses, whether it's our children, the art of communication is a practice. And I'll be very honest, I struggled with it growing up. It was such a challenge for me because for somewhere, I didn't know how to fully express my emotions, because there were moments where if I did express something and they were rejected, I felt so judged. Growing up with a spiritual family, having a very different childhood background, I remember even in the first grade or elementary school, if there were topics I expressed, sometimes I'd be looked at as a weirdo. I don't know if you've ever remember growing up and there were times you expressed something and people would look at you a little strange and you just kind of hid in the background. And I remember growing up, I started to, hold myself back a little more and more, because I was afraid if I would communicate something different, I'd be accepted. I wouldn't be accepted, or I'd be rejected. And so this art of communication, I feel, in all of us really has to be brought up in a way to see how vital it is to go all the way back to when we first learned it. And really to explore the importance of seeing how this expression of communication is not only what we share outwardly, but also what we receive inwardly. And what I mean by that is growing up in a family, and if you were around a very boisterous family, there was a lot of outward expression. There was probably not even a time to get a word in, so there was a lot of emoting. And so we may have not had great examples of how maybe to express deeper from our heart versus our head. Likewise, in just the receiving amount of communication, how many times, especially as us men, were we there to fully listen without responding? Because a lot of us men are fixers or problem solvers. And so sometimes we look at communication as this transfer of information or this rational mind of communication. Yet what happens if right now communication becomes a vital source for us to replace everything that we learned growing up and now open up a whole new door to what we're receiving now in a higher and greater awareness? For someone that had a hard time expressing their feelings, for someone that had a hard time speaking the truth, it really showed me how holding back my communication, though it felt safe as a child, got me into a lot of problems when I first entered my relationships. Because as many of you know, as a man, if we're not resolving our inner childhood pains and our wounds, then they're going to show up in our relationships, especially as the relationships get more conscious and evolved. And I'll tell you, I thought I was a good communicator as I moved out and did the inner work myself. But once I entered the greatest conscious relationship of my life and into my marriage, that's when I realized my communication was not even close to being par. Because a lot of times I would hold back in communicating to avoid conflict. Or I'd hold back in communicating not to hurt people. Or I'd hold back my fullest expression because I was afraid I would do something wrong. All these unresolved fears, all these areas that didn't allow me to communicate. And interesting, one of the greatest areas that I love to do is speak from my heart. Yet I was holding back that energy because I was afraid if I would say something wrong based on fears, or I would be judged based on the fear of being judged, then all of a sudden I wouldn't feel natural in my sense of expression. So all that you're listening, I just want you to hear and know that communicating is an art and it's a practice. And it's a level that I feel we're all engaging deeper and deeper. And what I feel truly as a man that works with a lot of men, which I'm so excited and delighted that on Thursday, June 25th, we will be bringing our greatest version of the conscious evolved men to its next level. And I'm having a dear speaker, Matt Berthart, to bring in his mastery of communication. And I have something very special for the men that will be there, and that will be presented at the end of the episode, which I wholeheartedly invite you. It will be 8 p.m. Eastern. When receiving this, please email me at info@ascensionalchemist.com. If you're receiving it afterwards, I do have the replay for you, so feel free, whether you can catch it live on the replay. It's going to be a power episode on communication. As a man that has lived now into his 50s, I would say communication has opened up a whole new level of awareness. I've really started to see that in all my years, there was a deeper level of communicating from the head versus the heart. And it's a whole different story. Have you ever heard someone that was communicating straightly from a rational standpoint, from pure facts, pure information, and you're just aware of that frequency. And then you hear someone speaking from their heart and their compassion, and their empathy, and from their pure authenticity. Do you notice the difference, the depth? Neither right, neither wrong is both. But it's interesting to see what happens to the connection when we speak from more a heart-centered place versus from a head-oriented place. Because what I've learned in these years is when I communicate from my head, there is this passage that the communication has to go through the unhealed wounds, the old conditions and beliefs, in the areas that are still haven't been resolved in myself to speak through. Versus when I speak through the heart, and I speak through the greatest power in this universe, divine love, there is a clarity and truth that is so pristine. And I find right now, as we move from this egoic mental consciousness of communication and into this heart-centered awakening consciousness, it requires us to make a shift in our communication. And that requires great work, which I wasn't quite aware of when I was a child because I didn't have the greatest demonstration of it. I had a beautiful family, great mothers and fathers, but they were only limited in their own areas because, boy, did I have a father that would have a short fuse and his anger would go off, which would make me move into that flight, fight, freeze, or fawn. My mother sometimes would be, making sure everything is all right. And obviously that people-pleasing, staying in the comfort zone, created this opportunity where I learned communication, but I didn't feel the depth of it from a way that I could fully see the clarity of it. And as I started to evolve and look at communication is one of the most powerful tools to not only connect with other individuals, but connect to the divine. Because in one element, as we're communicating outwardly, what is happening to our inward communication? Because what we're thinking inside of ourselves, what we're feeling, is a direct relationship of how we communicate outwardly. And many of us weren't taught that. And it really shows up in relationships when there's discomfort or conflict, because how we communicate to ourselves is how we're going to communicate to our most loved ones. And that's where it really requires a shift and what I believe a greater awareness to bring forth our mastery of this communication. A key and tool that once we align with our highest truth and authenticity, then it naturally flows through us. Yet, there are going to be many challenges along the way, because there's going to be people that may not able to communicate the way we want them to communicate. We're going to hear things on the outside that trigger us, but how can we communicate and still hold them in compassion, empathy? I had a conversation earlier with a dear friend, and he was saying during his awakening process, it was hard to communicate and share what he was going through because he couldn't relate to anyone. So that closed himself up, and I fully resonated with that because many times through my childhood, there'd be deep experiences, even spiritual moments where I wanted to communicate from my heart, but I couldn't quite find the words because I was afraid if I shared them, which many times I did, people would look at me as weird and strange. So one of the journeys in communication I find so important is to find that inner communication in the authority of your strength, and recognizing that within how I communicate to myself, with love, with respect, with honor, and then share that outwardly so that what I want to receive in communication is the direct way that I am choosing to communicate so that it attracts as within, so without. Another aspect is when we meet a harsh level of communication, especially in this time where many people don't really think. They just speak. I've done this many times. You ever notice like you speak before you actually know exactly what you're going to say, and you're just emoting old wounds and pains, and before you know it, the consequences happen, and you're like, how did I get myself in that? So to really realize that communication may not just start from what we speak, but it's in our body and how we feel, and just noticing it from what am I observing about myself today in my body's language, and how I can communicate that in a way that is purely authentic. Because if I'm in an angry, frustrated mode, I can catch my words just by seeing how my body's reacting. It's such a valuable tool because it's not only our expression and our reception, but it's also our healing. And one of the greatest aspects I love about communication is what happens if just your presence becomes the greatest gift you give someone. Just by holding space and allowing one to communicate their deepest feelings, their harsh realities of life, their pains, their problems, and you're here just to listen with your heart to hold that space, which to me has become a great tool to learn after many years, because I was very quick to answer. And in listening, a lot of times we want to respond immediately, but what happens when we just give that space, or even that pause when someone asks us a question? I've known when listening to my wife and just hearing her speak and giving that time not to answer back, it has become so nourishing for her. And she's reminded when she does ask a question to me, can I just take a pause so I could fully digest it? Sometimes we hear it and we think we know what the question is, but we have to fully embrace it before we respond automatically. It can be like a what do you call it? A kick jump? Lost the expression, but a knee-jerk reaction. And that all of a sudden happens, and before we know it, we're back to our old wounds of defending, expressing, when what happens if our communication becomes more aligned with the truth of who we are, the truth of our soul presence, and not just our human presence. And that's where I find the greater level of divine communication comes in, because now we start to talk about how we shift from the limited perspectives the human may see from our mind. And now we open up our heart-centered communication to allow the soul to communicate from a deep place where it's no longer ourselves communicating, but our infinite intelligence, our greater self, our higher divine nature that comes through us. And what I've recognized in these 50 years is it's become a journey of shifting out of the head, out of that egoic mindset where it only sees the representation of my personality, my outer superficiality of who I am, and communicating it from that lens, and then diving deeper into the heart and communicating from that love and compassion that is the truth of what we're here to share, not only from our expression, but also to connect with others. And that's where I believe communicating can be really fun. I was having a conversation and I was saying, what would happen if the keys to communication opens up your heart-centered desires? Because could you imagine if each choice of the word, the sentence, the phrases that you're placing in a tone could actually attract what you're declaring, and it could easily be a bystander, a stranger, someone in a supermarket, by just an expression or feeling, and before you know it, you're engaging in a heart-centered conversation that opens up an opportunity. What happens if you're having a deep, rich conversation with a loved one, and just by the articulation of the expression of your heart through your emotions allows them to feel safer, and then gives you that greater intimacy because now you're communicating through the heart, and that opens up the emotional intimacy for someone to enter deeper in your life. Many times my wife says, I can't feel you. I hear you. And when that happens, I know I'm not communicating from my heart. I'm communicating from my head. No matter how deep I may be saying, it may be coming still from a mental perspective, which is great when it's operational. But when it's in deep intimacy and it becomes a man's journey to reflect emotionally so a woman can fully receive them in their whole heart, it requires us to drop deeper into our heart. And to drop deeper into our heart, it requires us to open and feel what we express. You know, when people communicate, you can feel and you can sense where they're coming from. And there's other people that talk so fast and they're moving a mile a minute, and before you notice, you've lost the even connection or even what they're talking about because it's coming from another place, which again, it may be perfect for an auction or for a sales position or for an infomercial that you're just mentally grabbing to. But to me, the art and the blessing of the communication brings forth what I feel is our greatest gifts within ourselves. And as we drop deeper into our heart, I really understand that the more I allow that enriched communicating in myself, and I speak to myself with love, I speak to myself with respect, I speak to myself with honor, it opens up a greater divine communication that I'm hearing deeper and deeper in prayer and meditation. The more I radiate this frequency of God Almighty's love in me, I'm recognizing my outer communication, not only in clear audience, but what I'm able to speak in moments when I'm doing healing because it's coming through me as a channel. And that's where it's helped me understand that this art of communication is really a beautiful pathway to bring what I feel our heavenly goods through us. Because if we're communicating in a negative, low dense frequency, we're closing ourselves up and we're staying stuck in the problems and conflicts in life. Yet when we open our communication up into our heart-centered, joy-filled, natural way of living, then we attract these gifts of heaven that are within us. So maybe today, maybe in this beautiful summer solstice where the fire of sun is growing strong, is to make that commitment and make that discipline of how we choose to communicate to ourselves in our most loving, compassionate, heartfelt way, so that we can then share that to others and they can feel that and then recognize, wow, that feels so beautiful, so amazing that it inspires them to communicate. Because what I truly believe in is what happens if we're all activators and transformers in one way or another, where the choice of how we communicate, our words, our language, then becomes a ripple effect of how it impacts others. In a day and age where we're expanding and growing to the fullest version of ourselves, it's through our art of communicating our highest and greatest virtues in our truth, our authenticity, and the purity of what the divine gave us since we were seated. And to me, I am so devoted now to keep diving deeper into this art and power of communication, because I'm seeing it's opening up even a greater level that we have barely brushed the surface. Imagine that we've only learned a tidwink of how we communicate. And by bringing greater conscious awareness, especially within us men, because I know as women being great communicators, we can attract so much more. We can manifest a greater ability, and we're able to express in a way that resolves conflicts. We're able to move through challenging situations because it's not even the words that we may be using. It could be the body language, the observations, or the expression by just staying in a neutral stance, or what I say, a loving, balanced state, a regulated state in our nervous system that then promotes our ability to allow what moves through us. Because really, what happens if life is communicating through us in each and every moment? And we have a choice either to resist or to accept. And as we allow life's communication to flow through us, the more that we're open, the easier it is to flow through each and every step of life. Yet as life is communicating through us and we are resistant, we have strongholds that block this infinite life force, then it just makes it more challenging to move. So it becomes a great choice to say, how am I going to let life communicate through me? And when I say life, I'm saying God's presence that's here to allow you to see the greatest version of yourself. Because there's other aspects of life that can communicate and pull us down. So I find if we are a castle and there's a door, we open the door and choose how we want to communicate. Or we choose what wants to be communicated to us, because we're not going to invite strangers that communicate in a negative way and invite them for dinner. We're not going to invite people that express negative energy and allow them to sleep in our guest room. We want to bring forth our greatest communication in our life through those that treat us as we want to be treated, in love, respect, and honor. And what happens if it now becomes a key to really dive deeper into and seeing the root of it all, which goes all the way back to our childhood and our beautiful beloved family, knowing that we're here to evolve their limitations, and then to see who's below us from our children and the new generations and how we want to teach them of what the proper communication is, which I believe is from truth, authenticity, love, compassion, and the universal laws. It's such a juicy, wonderful discussion to dive into this powerful key of communication, that the ultimate key then becomes, how can I communicate with God Almighty? Because that then opens up the greatest door to be shown and led and guided to each and every dream and desire that you have. Imagine right now you have the key to open the door to communicate with God. And the more that you bring this loving presence for yourself, the way that God loves you, you bring that same frequency within yourself to then merge that bridge to communicate with God Almighty, then shifts your direction into the vision and purpose that you're here to live. To me, that's the ultimate communication, because when we receive and know that we are vessels, that God is communicating through us, then to me, the journey is to become as pure and aligned so that it moves through easily. And boy, is it a journey, because I've had to do some clearing, some releasing, some letting go of old habits, old toxins, old addictions, old behaviors, so that this body can naturally communicate through what divine wants to be seen and shown to. And for many of you that know, as a master healer, it's opening up in great ways, whether it's through the mentorships that I share in these beautiful Zoom sessions, or when people see me in person, that frequency communicates through me and shows miraculous areas that I can't even put words to. So it becomes this great journey that I invite each and every one of you of how to bring loving communication. And if there's anywhere I like to invite each of you to start, is with your heart. Because at the end of the day, we all want to be loved, supported, genuinely held in security and safety. And the more we can shift and communicate from what our heart wants versus what our head declares, then it becomes an active process, an active practice that each and every day we get to choose from love or from fear. And what I know, my heart chooses love, the head chooses fear, and love always wins. It always dissolves the fears because it's a higher frequency and higher vibration. And when we recognize this loving vibration is here to be shared within each and every one of us and to activate higher levels to open our greatest doors of success and growth, then it becomes a daily discipline of communicating in our divine nature in each and everything we do. For those that want to dive deeper and those that see this, I have this great course for men called The Journey of the Conscious Evolved Man, and it's 12 keys, 12 universal principles. And communication is a powerful tool that I use and that I express and that I give wonderful tools, exercise, and a workbook that is a great element to add to your daily practice. Please contact me at info@ascensionalchemist.com and I can share more. Or if you want to go to our website, ascensionalchemist.com, that is another opportunity to visit this course. What I want to leave you with today is the greater we can communicate within ourselves into what we truly want to be heard, to be seen, to be sorted, to be supported, then the greater we are able to be received outside of ourselves. And so to me, it becomes a daily commitment and responsibility that we hold ourselves in such devotion of how communication becomes a vital artery, a vital breath straight through the heart. Because that is where we're going. And that frequency of the heart is going to communicate with such a direct impact that it's going to bring incredible wealth. And not wealth from just a financial aspect, wealth of joy, wealth of love, wealth of happiness, prosperity that is beyond what we can only imagine. And that starts with communicating from the heart, connecting to the divine, and knowing that we are fully blessed to receive everything that we are calling upon within ourselves. So once again, thank you all for joining this power-filled podcast today, as I believe communication becomes the doorway to success and allowing everything to flow in its highest light and highest love. Wishing you all a most beautiful, blessed day, and look forward to speaking to you next time.